All right, in this chapter, we will have two what we call special right triangles. The first one is the 45, 45, 90. What makes this special is that this picture or item or triangle has been used for a long time all over the world in so much construction because it's a very stable picture. They use it in buildings, they use it in bridges, and it's been around for a very long time. It is said to be a perfect half of a square and a very stable, when it comes to construction, very stable and very sturdy, very dependable. So the 45, 45, 90 is our first special right triangle. It is the easier of the two because it's also known as the isosceles right triangle, meaning it has two equal angles and two equal sides called legs. So we'll say the legs are equal to each other and the hypo is bigger and it's across the right angle. Now, what I have here on the top three things are going to be little formulas. So what I do want you to remember is that when we deal with the 45, 45, 90 right triangle, the majority of the work is going to consist with the radical 2. You're going to see the radical 2 in a lot of 45, 45, 90 right triangles. So here's our first formula in our first box. Find leg when you're given leg. Well, this is going to be cake because the legs are equal. It's isosceles. So in this picture, the leg L that we're looking for is 4 because the other leg is 4. So the hypo is always across from the 90. One leg is across from our 45. The other leg is across from the other 45. And our legs always meet at the right angle. So that's how you can find your legs and identify the legs. So look at this second equation in green. How do I find the leg when we are given the hypo? And there it is. The hypo here, which is across from the 90, has a radical 2 on it. And I said you're going to see a lot of radical 2 with this triangle. The formula says to get that leg, divide the hypo by radical 2. And that is the formula. So what will our L be on this picture? Let me show you the math here. And if you watch the video previous to this, you're going to see that all that happens here is these cancel out. And the leg, our L, is just going to be 9. I accidentally hit a button here. Okay. Now, how to find the hypo. So here's our first one where we're trying to find something that's in the H position, the hypo. And it gives you a leg. So it gives us a leg of 7 here. How do you find the hypo? The formula for hypo is to take leg times radical 2. That is the formula. So let me show you what this looks like. This is 7 times radical 2. And these are not like terms. We got a whole number and a radical. And all we do, we cannot multiply them. So all we'll do is write them next to each other as our final answer. Okay, so let's look at some tough stuff here. 2 tough problems. Look at number 1. What happens, the math that's required, the math that you're going to see when we're trying to find a leg and we're given the hypo. Okay, so look at my three formulas up here. I'm looking for leg given the hypo. That's the middle problem. That's this middle formula. It says hypo divided by radical 2. Well, look at my problem here. My hypo is 10, and I'm dividing it by radical 2. In the previous video, I said you cannot have a radical 2 in the denominator, or any radical in the denominator. And the process to get rid of it is to multiply it by 1. And 1 can be represented just like this. Now here's another review. So 10 times radical 2 is 10 radical 2 on top. Radical 2 times radical 2 is radical 4. Radical 4 is a special number. We call this a perfect square. The square root of 4 is 2. I'm going to continue over here and then erase it. So this is what I'll have. Hopefully you have enough room to put it in here, somewhere in this box. So radical 2 can't be broken down. Leave it. It's a decimal. Don't touch it. 10 divided by 2 is 5. And that is going to be our final answer, because if I was to take this any further, I would get a decimal. So this would be 5 radical 2. And I hope you had enough room to write in that box. But you can pause it and erase and try to fit it all in there, but I need to move on. And I'm going to make room for my next problem. Now look at this. This is the same exact process, but now my hypo, I wanted you to see what happens when your hypo is an odd number. So instead of an even number like we just had, it's an odd number now. This is find the leg given the hypo. I'm still here in this middle box. I'm still using that formula. So 13 divided by radical 2 is the formula I'm using. Okay, so I'm going to multiply it by 1 to get rid of the radical 2 on the bottom. And this is what my outcome will look like. I already talked to you about the radical 4 on the bottom. So this is where I'm at right now. 13 over 2, if you divide that, you get a decimal. So you cannot go any further, because I do not want to see a decimal. So that you go until you can't reduce any further. And then once you hit a decimal, you have to stop, because you cannot give me a decimal. So real quick, some quick review questions here. If you're still struggling, 3, these are like terms, the 2 and the 2. That becomes 3 radical 4. This really becomes 3 times the square root of 4, which is 3 times 2. And your final answer for this block is 6. All right, remember how we do this to multiply by 1 to get rid of the radical on the bottom. You'll see this. You can pause this if you need to, but I'm going to go fast. Take care of this. This is a whole number. And that cannot be reduced because you'd get a decimal. This is a 3 on the bottom, so that's why I'm multiplying it by 1, represented like this. So I'll say 9 radical 3 over square root of 9. That is a perfect square. It becomes 3. The square root of 9 is 3. These can reduce. 9 divided by 3 is 3. Final answer, 3 radical 3. All right, so I got 9 questions here, broken up into mild, category, medium categories, and hots. I like easy, medium, and hard problems, but I like chicken wings so much I usually say mild, medium, and hot. So number one, what they give us? A leg. What is y? It's a leg. What does our formula say? How do you find a leg? When given a leg, legs are equal. Y is 7. Number two, I'm going to have to find two things. 5 is a leg. Y is a leg. The legs are equal. So I now have Y. The hypo is X. Hypo equals leg times radical 2 in the formula above. So 5 times radical 2 is 5 radical 2 because we are going to keep it like this to avoid a decimal. Here is our first hot problem. I have a hypo because it's across the right angle. I want to find a leg. What's nice about this is once I find this leg, I'll have both legs because they're equal. It says to take your hypo and divide it by radical 2 to get a leg. Remember how we do this? We're going to multiply by 1. Okay. This becomes 28 radical 2 over the square root of 4. This becomes 2. I'm actually going to go ahead and just say it's 2. And then 28 divided by 2 is 14. I can't take this any further because it'd be a decimal. Both of these are 14 radical 2. Rewind it if you need to, but I got to keep going. Another easy one would be I have the hypo, I need the leg. It says take the hypo, divide it by a radical 2, and what will happen is these cancel out. And you're done. I have a leg. Okay, here's my other leg. It's equal. I don't have to really do anything. They're equal to each other. Formula above says to get the hypo, take leg times radical 2. Well, 4 radical 2 is the leg, and I'm going to times it by radical 2. So let's see what happens. Whole number, radical, radical. Radical 4 is a special number. That becomes 2. This is really 4 times 2. Your hypo is 8. Our second hard problem. Hypo, to get the leg, divide it by radical 2. That's what it says on top of the page. So here we go, multiplying it by 1. The top is 9 radical 2. Let's look what happens at the bottom. This becomes 4, radical 4. And what's the square root of 4? It's 2. Can I do anything with this, or will I hit a decimal? This is done because you'll hit a decimal if you go any further. That is both legs. All right, another easy one. Here's a leg, 14. This leg is equal, 14. The hypo, to get the hypo, it says leg times radical 2. 14 times radical 2 is 14 radical 2. I have to keep it there because I'd get a decimal. 9 radical 2 is a leg. How do I get the hypo? Times it by radical 2. To get the hypo, multiply the leg by radical 2. This becomes 9 radical 4. This is a special number. This becomes the whole number 2. This is really 9 times 2. and that's 18. Our last hard one is the same thing as the one up here. To get the leg, divide by radical 2. And hopefully you get 15 radical 2 for both. How does that work? Times it by radical 2 over radical 2. I get 30 radical 2 over radical 4. This becomes 2. So really that is no longer there. The square root of 4 is 2. And 30 divided by 2 gets my 15. 15 times radical 2 is a decimal, so I do not make it or take it any further.